podcast. Each month we look back at games played by Gauntlet folks. My name is Shane, I use she and her pronouns, and I'm recording today on the land of the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and want to acknowledge that their sovereignty was never ceded. I'm joined today by my co-host, Lol. How are you doing today?
I am doing it just fine.
Excellent. And we have with us this month Agatha Cheng, who's the co-host of the two-time Emmy Award-winning podcast Asians Represent, cultural consultant and game writer. How are you doing today, Agatha?
I'm great, especially after that emphasis. Thanks.
No problem.
I'm so happy to be here, though. This is nice.
Excellent. For our first segment, each of us gets to go over the games that we played, and we'll each talk in depth about one game that we played on the Gauntlet calendar. So, Lol, how was your gaming in August and September?
So I had a pretty good time. Off Gauntlet, I did some Hearts of Wulin, and then I also had a chance to play a couple of sessions of Songs for the Dusk, which is a weird fantasy post-apocalyptic Forged in the Dark game that I've only played it a couple times, so I still haven't developed a full sense of that. On the Gauntlet, I did Hearts of Wulin, a one-shot of that. I did Red Markets, which still remains wild. Changing the Lost PBTA, Godbound. I did Fate, Skyship Concerto, a short series of that. And then I also did 2 different series of Masks. And that's what I want to talk about today, even though we've talked about Masks a lot in the past. But I did something different, and I wanted to go over that. Basically, Masks is a game of teen supers who are dealing with self-identity as well as fighting villains. And I did 2 different sequential campaigns. One of them was 1 month long, and the other one was 2 months long. And the first one was a setting where everything had gone wrong. I called it Days of Shadows Past to do my Claremont X-Men reference. And in it, the players collaboratively chose what would be the disaster that had hit the world. So was it government crackdown and control over superhero activities? Was it mass public damage due to a superheroic event? Was it a group of heroes who went bad in some mass public way? Was it the Thanos snap? I had a whole list of those things. And then the players collaboratively made some choices about that in our session 0, and in this case it was heroes who had turned into villains and like caused massive destruction and broke part of the moon and all this. But it was that series. And then the other one I did for 2 months, I called Year 1. Basically, it's everybody gets to choose as a PC an existing character from an existing superhero comic or property or whatever, and run a teen first year version of that character and doing a kind of the reimaginings of those. So those were the 2 that ended up very different and both really good. Masks remains surprisingly robust and variable. I mean, there's a built-in setting with Halcyon City, but I think once you really dig in, you can do a lot of different things with it. And I'd love to see more material come out for Masks, just because I think there's still a lot of veins to be mined in it. But the Days of Shadows Past series, it was 5 sessions, and usually I can do session 0 in half a session, and then we get to playing. These players, they dug into it. They worked all of this backstory that they'd come up with about the disaster into their own stories, and they went back and forth, and they reworked things, and it took the whole session, but it was one of the best session 0s I've had in a long time, just like really solid. And the thing that was interesting was that they really played with all of the material that they generated in session 0 came out during the 4 sessions that we played. They made use of everything. Players listened to what other characters had built. They connected those relationships. They were willing to come back and draw on those elements and draw on a little bit of the darkness. The fallen hero is essentially the big bad hero who had turned evil ended up being the dad of one of the characters, and then there was another character's dad who was part of the problem when this happened, and it all worked together. So it was really solid. And then the other campaign, the Year 1 campaign, was, which is fun. Like, it was super, super fun. I honestly believe that all RPG play is fan fiction. Even if you're not doing a licensed setting, that's the way you ought to approach it. Like you're writing what you want to have as cool stories. It's not necessarily a writer's room like TV's writer's room. I think it is more like, oh, this is the kind of thing I want to see. So being able to do that for existing characters and getting permission to do that in the context of Mask was really fun. So we had Catwoman. Jolene did that, and Jolene's Catwoman was amazing. And Jolene coordinated her outfit and her makeup to Catwoman. It was dynamite. We had a Daredevil, very much in the mold of the TV series. Doctor Strange was done, She-Hulk, and then for the last couple of sessions, we had someone come in as Thor, which ended up allowing us to bring Loki in as the real big bad reveal from behind the scenes. So it was really fun. Amazing tweaks on these characters. People really thought about, okay, what does a young version of these characters look like? And for some of them, it's kind of obvious. Daredevil seems like a young character in some ways, but we had a Doctor Strange who was, rather than, having an accident, someone was more of the reborn, with part of the soul of the Ancient One, and was supposedly the Chosen One, and stuck in this sort of version of Hogwarts kind of thing in New York. And it was really good. I liked all the tweaks. For me as a GM, the best part of this is that you get to combine and remix all of those universes, all of the DC and Marvel stuff, because what they've chosen allows you to go, okay, well, we've got She-Hulk in here, so we want to bring some of the Hulk stuff in. We've got some street level stuff from the other characters, but maybe we'll bring in some other magical stuff. And the players also chose, okay, here's another superhero who's in the setting, and here's another supervillain who's in the setting. So we did a little more work with that. And we were able to tweak them. So they were able to battle a group, and they didn't realize until later that it was kind of an analog for the Fantastic Four. And here's the biggest cheat in the world. People do alternate costume drawings all over Pinterest and DeviantArt. And that is how you do this. So you go and you search for Spider-Man alternate costume, and then you use that as the costume for the character. It is the biggest cheat, and it is wild because you can pull out these character images for a character that the players know and love and have introduced, but they look different. They're like, this is a different Iron Man armor. We've never seen this Iron Man armor before. Or, this is a different version of the Abomination. It's really, really wonderful. This is a superb concept, especially for new people. If you want new people to come in who maybe haven't played Masks or maybe haven't played RPGs or haven't played Supers, this is a great way to do it, to build off what they know and have them a chance to play out the stories that they like. And as I said, Masks works. We had some really interesting picks. For example, I had some thoughts about what Doctor Strange would be, but we ended up with a Nova for Doctor Strange, and the Nova is the character who can't control their powers. So that made for a very different Doctor Strange, and that was wild because they're super powerful, but they can also lose control. And then our Thor character was a legacy. So he was trying to live up to the idea of Odin and so on, and that was a big burden that was on him. So really, really great stuff there. So a few things that I'm a little bit less sure. So I went into the disaster game going, ooh, this is going to be dark. Ooh, I'm going to make this so dark. Ooh, look at this. Look how dark I can be. And we did get a little bit of that, but it was more the darkness that was in the characters. And at first I was like, oh, I really wish it had been a little bit darker. And then I was like, no, we had a great time. I don't know what I was expecting, like if we were going to have like a full Days of Future Past, Sentinels camps, or I don't know. But as a GM, you've got to be willing to go, okay, this is the tone we're going with. This is the tone that the players want to be at. This is the level we want to do. And maybe Masks wouldn't be perfect for that kind of full disaster game when all the players are emotional disasters themselves. The year one game, it's very easy, and I had to really restrain myself to get carried away with the references. We can't assume that everyone knows everything. For example, one of the players who played Daredevil, his experience with Daredevil is purely the television show, not the comic books or anything else. And that didn't occur to me until we were talking about that. That kind of changes how I want to approach that. And you need to check in with the players, figure out what their level of familiarity is, and work to that level. And if you do bring in references, be willing to stop and explain them. if it's important, explain it, show it off. Don't make a player feel bad because they haven't read 30 years worth of X-Men comics or anything like that. Mask itself, there are only a couple of things. This always hits me whenever I play Mask. Some of the Mask character playbooks are much easier than others, and some of them are much more effective than others. There's some of them that in a fight, they've got a bigger toolbox for doing those kinds of things. And when you've played a lot of superhero games and you're used to kind of parity or balance, you've got to be ready for that. And Mask also has a number of things. And I know, Agatha, you've played Mask, so you've probably seen this where, here, let's go into this move. Okay, well, this move is going to trigger off to this move. Okay, we've done celebration. Okay, now I'm going to share an intimate moment. Okay, now we're going to do this. Oh, I have to ship labels now. Okay, well, let's shift. Oh, wait, now that we shift labels, that's going to trigger off this thing. Every once in a while, there's this fractal move that eats up like the next 5 minutes. And sometimes that bugs me. So as a GM, I try to keep an eye out for that. So my general takeaway is I would definitely run this again. The disaster concept is easy. I think a good framework. It's a way of changing up masks from just throwing, okay, let's just do a mask game, and allows people to collaborate on building things. And the year one, I really want to do again just because I want to see a different roster of characters. Like there are all kinds of characters that I would love to see what their starting point is and seeing that again.
That sounds awesome. I haven't played Masks in ages, and I'm really keen to get a game going again. Agatha, how was your August and September in gaming?
Oh, man. Well, okay. It's kind of funny because in September is when I started a different job for a while. So, that's when I basically stopped gaming with all the people that I usually game with, which are all people from Europe. So, but I think actually in July and August is the majority of my gaming, and I actually only had one game in September, if I remember correctly. So off Gauntlet, I've been running Blades in the Dark. That's been pretty fun. I've never run quote-unquote vanilla Blades before, because I started off running Mothlight and then moved to Blades, and it was like, oh, I see. This is where it all came from. And it was really fun. I ran for people actually on the Agents Represent server, and finally getting to play with just random people that I've never played with before was fun. On Gauntlet, I was in Lol's game of Trail of Cthulhu. That was very fun. Mm-hmm. It really did hit all the right notes of horror and America from the past.
Yes.
I don't know what kind of note that is, but nostalgia, I guess, ? And then I put this as on Gauntlet, but it's the game of Declan Oblige, the playtest that Jamie's been running. I was in one of those playtests, and that game is super evocative.
Yeah.
It's also a lot of threads to keep track of, and that was when I learned that I am not very good at politicking. Which just translates to my character being bad at it. But anyway, that one's fun. And then I've also been doing the Game Creator Workshop play tests, which has been really interesting to see what other people are coming up with. But the game that I did want to talk about is actually a game that I was in off Gauntlet. It's called Volleyboyz. It's by Kevin Wynn. Kevin ran it for us for a stream with Agents Represent at Gen Con. So that was the one time that I played it, but it was very fun. So Volleyboyz is a no dice, no masters, aka belonging outside belonging game. And it is basically what it sounds like. It's a game based off of sports anime tropes, particularly Haikyuu. All of the game moves in there are volleyball terminology. I think so. I haven't actually watched Haikyuu, and I haven't touched a volleyball since I was in high school. So I made a lot of assumptions playing this game. In this game, each person picks a sports anime archetype, and then everyone sets scenes together, just like most belonging outside belonging games. An example of what the moves are, you would use sets, which are weak moves, to gain tokens, and then you would spend those tokens on spikes, aka strong moves. What worked for me for this game was that it's just, it is very good at evoking the theme and the feel of a sports anime. The meat and potatoes of No Dice, No Masters games are in their playbooks, and reading this, you get a really good idea of what archetype you are dealing with. And that is so important because there's no GM.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so for example, one of the character archetypes is the genius, which is king of the mountain. All know your skill and powers, but you stand alone, lonely, unless ... And so it's basically like, it gives you like a suggestion of what position your character can be in on the team, like server, setter, spiker, blocker, libero. They have like a question of what you can explore thematically for your character, which is, does a team make the player better or does the player make the team better? Like, am I the one carrying the team or is the team making me who I am? You know, like that. So it's very sports anime. And then like the bonds as well are really good. Which teammate are you jealous of? Which teammate do you wish understood you better? It evokes that kind of intense emotional highs and lows that is really good about these youth-filled animes. And so I really like that. I think it does that aspect of it very well. Like, clearly Kevin has watched a lot of sports animes, which he has admitted himself. So if you know the genre, you'll read it and be like, yes, like this is exactly what I would do with this kind of character. That is one aspect that I really liked about this game. And another thing is the way that the game provides prompts for scene setting. Mm-hmm. And there's a section in the game called Next Time on Volleyboyz at the end of each episode, which a session can contain multiple episodes. But basically, like when you finish, I guess, the arc of one episode, then you can be like, cool, now let's look through this list and choose what is going to occur in the next quote-unquote episode. So some of the things that you can choose is there's a bunch of options about playing games, sports games. So one option is win, just barely. One is win, you were pushed to your absolute limits. One is lose, on a technicality. Or lose, you got squashed. So those are like the game ones. And then there's also just like other random prompts. So 2v2 beach volleyball match. Or blank character quits the team. Blank character joins the team. Just a lot of these different types of moments that occur in sports animes. And I love this list because that's the one thing that I sometimes struggle with No Dice, No Masters games, which is that there's no GM, so it's hard to like know what kind of narrative arc you want to set for your game. But so this, I feel like, is a really great way to counter that struggle that players can have, which is that there's a set time where you will always be picking from the list. So first of all, there's that structure in there. And then there is an actual list where you can be like, oh yeah. And it's just really good for getting people to start brainstorming about, I think this is called idle dreaming, right? Mm-hmm. In Belonging Outside Belonging games, this is where you can idle dream about like, oh, like what kind of story arc do we want next? I remember looking at these and then being like, oh my gosh, there should be a beach episode next, you know, where the whole team like has a beachside training / we're hanging out and eating watermelon episode. It's really good at helping with the structure of the game and helping everyone jump on board, because it's very like low mental load, where there's a list, there's a timeline for when you choose from the list, but it's also very free because like you don't have to follow a specific structure. You can choose whichever one of these options when you're going through them. So that I also really like about this game. I think in general, No Dice, No Masters or Belonging Outside Belonging is great if you're playing with a table full of people who know the genre. I had the same experience when I was playing Grand Guignol, which is like that gothic game, and everyone in the game was really versed in evoking high gothic drama, and so like we all kind of like knew where we wanted to go, which was to get more and more intense, right? Like so, and with this one, I think if you know the tropes, if you've watched sports anime, then you would be like, oh my gosh, yeah, like this is the kind of story that I enjoy when I watch this. And then you can use this game to do that because the game is so free and it provides you the tools that you can pick and choose on which you want to tell that specific kind of story. I guess one of the things that is always kind of tricky for me, especially with belonging outside belonging games, and I'm going to go into what I'm less sure about, which is that I don't really know what it's like for someone, if someone is, for example, not familiar with animes, if they were to pick up this, it has very evocative writing and like story beats written into the playbooks and these prompts. It's very hard for me to imagine what it's like to come into this like completely new, right? Like you just play games and then you see a new game, you want to try the game. I don't know, because there's no fallback of a GM to be like, let me guide the tone and then like, and shape it in this specific narrative. I don't know what that would be like, but that's not necessarily a problem of this specific game, but more just like a GM-less game. They're pretty hard, I think, to do. Like they're great when they work, but also I think it's a little bit harder sometimes to make them work. So that's one thing that I'm less sure about, which is the system. Another thing is that the episode structure is sometimes like, I guess this is like where the freedom and like, do I want more structure or do I not? Because like it says in the game text that a session can have multiple episodes and you decide when it ends, which again is great if everyone already knows a genre and you're like right after you win or like right after someone like drops some truth bomb, then you're like, okay, and then we end the episode here, right? If people are familiar with the genre, then it works, but it can be tricky, I think, if you haven't watched like 5 seasons of different shows. I don't know, but I'm also speaking from the perspective of someone who has watched many seasons of sports animes. I have not watched Haikyuu, but I have watched many seasons of Prince of Tennis, so I think if you get a group together that love the genre and are good at telling stories, then this is great.
Awesome.
I've been really excited recently. It seems like there's been a lot more games with sports themes coming out. And yeah, as a big fan of the genre, very excited for this. For Story Brewers have their Kickstarter at the moment. Avery Elder just released some playtest rules for Monster Hearts as a sports game.
What?
Oh, yes!
Oh,
which I'm super
what?
excited to try out. I'm just really excited to play basically all of these games.
Me too, actually. I have my eyes on the Story Brewers game. That's the one that I want to try next. I was not aware of the sports hack of Monster Hearts. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in August and September, off the gauntlet, I played Thirsty Sword Lesbians, Body Hack, which is Kira McGrann's sort of cyberpunk solo journaling game. That was pretty fun.
Oh, wow.
Bluebeard's Bride I got to play. That was really great, of course. Bed Breakfast and Beyond from Codex, which is a sort of spin-off from Brindlewood Bay about an elderly gay couple running a haunted bed and breakfast. And both on and off the gauntlet, I got to play, I'm sorry, did you say Street Magic, which I talked about last month. On the gauntlet, I got to play Alice is Missing for the first time, finished up my game of The Between. I got to play Rising Tide. That was my first Aegon-type game. That's Dan Brown's Paragon playset about eco-terrorists in the near future fighting against environmental destruction. That was really fun. I got to play one session of Manishtana, Why Is This Night Different? Which I know has been talked about multiple times on this show and is absolutely as good as everyone else has said. A really remarkable and powerful game. And finished up a quarterly game of the Yellow King role-playing game, which is what I'm going to talk about at more length. So the Yellow King role-playing game is a gumshoe game by Robin D. Laws from Pelgrane Press. It's based on a set of short stories about The King in Yellow by Robert Chambers. If people aren't familiar, Chambers basically was the biggest romance writer of the 1890s and had a small sideline in weird and horror fiction, which today is what he's best remembered for. Specifically, the 4 stories. Yeah, I've taught law.
I literally had no idea that he was a romance writer.
I understand literally the biggest in the world, like a massively successful romance novelist and short story writer who occasionally branched out and wrote a little bit of a horror story. And so the King in Yellow stories are about this mysterious alien king and a banned play that sort of summons him and destroys its readers' minds. I really like these stories. I think they have a great atmosphere of sort of the uncanny and inexplicable, which I really like. His stories were then referenced by Lovecraft in his fiction, and so incorporated from there by later writers into his mythos, and of course into mythos gaming, and even somewhat referenced in popular culture, like the first season of True Detective. The big idea that this game has is that it has a set of 4 settings, and it's not that you choose one of the 4 settings to play your game in. The game runs through the 4 settings. So you start out with a set of characters in 1890s Paris. They're American, sort of expat American art students, which was a really fun idea, I thought. Then the second setting, they're a different set of characters fighting in a war in Europe in an alternate reality with kind of supernatural stuff going on. Then they play revolutionaries in, again, an alternative timeline version of the contemporary United States. They've just overthrown the despotic regime from some of Chambers' stories. And then the last setting is sort of more or less our present, the real world, quote unquote, the real world. What worked for me is I think those settings are really fantastic. The settings themselves, but also the way they're connected, and that the concept of the characters, well, different characters being connected across them. The specific connections the game draws, I think, are really smart and fun. I think generally one of the biggest strengths of the stuff that Pelgrane Press has been publishing is the setting material, especially historical material. And the 1890s Paris stuff here does really stand out as the best.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely fantastic. If you're interested in setting a game in that era, you should really check it out. I do find some of Pelgrane's historical setting material could probably have used a little stronger sort of sensitivity reading, but still just a lot of stuff that's really great, and these settings I think are particularly well. That linked setting setup of the game also works really well for this sort of weird horror game about reality breaking down, and I found some like really fun stuff to do with scenes outside of time that recurred in different settings, or just having a new character appear in a new setting who has the same name as a villain they'd fought previously, and getting some sort of juice out of the players from their responses to that. Even though it's a pretty traditional game in a lot of ways, it also has really good opportunities for players to have input in the fiction, both in character creation, where they give you things like the deuced peculiar business that they've recently encountered, but also the push system connected to abilities in the game that allows them in specific mechanical ways to have input into the fiction, what's happening, what's there, what's in the scene. So by the time we got to our last setting, the run was made up almost entirely of material that the players had generated themselves, which was really fun and satisfying for me. The last thing that I want to mention that worked for me, and this is almost too basic to mention, but was a bit of a surprise to me. So this year I've played a lot of Brindlewood Bay and The Between and other games that use similar mystery mechanics where there is no predetermined solution to the mystery and the players establish that through play and through the mechanics. Playing a mystery game where there is a fixed solution was just really interesting in contrast. I'd almost forgotten that that could be like a fun and satisfying thing. The ways that players could short circuit the solution. I know this can sometimes be a problem in mystery games, but there was just a really satisfying and exciting beat in one of the stories where early in the run, Puckett's character asked the actual villain, who I had expected not to be revealed until much later, the exact right question to force their hand. And so suddenly, out of nowhere, there was this very dramatic revelation and fight scene. Having a predetermined solution allows stuff like that to happen in a way that I think can be really exciting and cool. Some things I'm less sure about. On the Gauntlet, we have this convention of quarterly games, so that's a longer game of around 12 sessions running for 3 months. I've come to really enjoy quarterly games for the balance that they strike. It's long enough to get some depth and some development of the characters and things like that, but it's not unsustainably long, even for people with busy schedules. But I think the quarterly was specifically a bad choice for this game, because what it meant obviously is that there were like 2 to 3 sessions for each setting. And so we had the commitment and the build-up of expectations of a longer game, but without ever getting to like pace things gently and escalate, without ever getting to like really examine the characters. I really felt that in particular in the last setting because I wanted to bring things to a big climax that would be satisfying for the characters. It was like, well, I've played with them for 2 sessions. I don't know anything about these people really. I don't know what would be exciting or horrifying or climactic. So I would definitely suggest a different length if you're thinking of running this game. I just said that I liked the mysteries having a fixed solution, but I think another thing that I wasn't sure about was the sort of investigative focus of this game and the way Gumshoe deals with it. So a lot of listeners will know that the kind of pitch of Gumshoe is that it solves or claims to solve a problem with investigative games, which is that in a game like Call of Cthulhu, everything can grind to a halt when you roll dice to find a clue and you roll badly and you don't find the clue, and then you just sit around the table staring at each other awkwardly because nobody knows what to do next. So Gumshoe's solution is that you have investigative abilities and you just get a clue when you use them. So if you're in the right place and you have the right ability, you just get the clue. And I acknowledge that that's an improvement on the alternative where you can blow the dice roll, but I still think there's a lot of ways for players not to get the clues that are theoretically in front of them.
Yeah, some of the adventures, some Gumshoe modules are really good at putting that kind of material. Like, if they don't find it here, it needs to go here, stuff. And some of it is not, where you're like, okay, now what do I do?
Yeah, exactly. Again, I don't think that's difficult. I think that GMs routinely actually just do that at the table, but I think like talking about best practices for it would be really helpful. I also want to talk about the card system that this game has, which is the way that it models harm, both physical and mental and other kinds of harm. When I first read the game, this is one of the things that really appealed to me, and I think there is a lot of really cool and smart things about these cards. So the way it works is, in a fight, when you roll badly to overcome an obstacle, when you fail a composure test, you get a card that is specific to what's triggering the harm, specific to what's happening to you. All the cards come in pairs, so there's a weaker and a stronger version of the same kind of harm, depending on how badly you rolled. And I like that sort of gradation in terms of the effects of rolling dice. And each card has an evocative name or a specific name. It has some sort of mechanical impact on you in play, and it has a condition for how you can discard the card. And if you end up racking up too many cards, that's 3 or 4 depending on what mode you're playing, your character either dies or is otherwise removed from play. The problems with these cards were about the amount of work that I had to do to actually use them at the gaming table. So that specificity that they have is a blessing and a curse. I spent easily half my prep time for each session, which already was probably more prep than I normally do for most of my games, just reading through these lists of cards, trying to figure out which ones might come up in play, organizing those ones. And often that meant like finding the ones that were the most generic, so I could use them in the most like possible circumstances that might happen, which then mitigates against all the cool things about having this very specific set of cards. It made it particularly difficult to improvise in play. I think if you were running a more ordered, sort of prepared, scenario-driven prep style, that would work well. But it's not just that I prefer to improvise, but the game actually asks the GM to improvise at certain points. The first session in each setting, we're encouraged to improvise based on material from the characters in character creation. I really like that as an approach to first sessions, but then I'm like, which cards will I be using for that improvisation? There was a point in play, for example, where Matthew may disagree, but I felt that the inevitable next step for his character was that he would feel compelled to carve a USB port into his forehead. And in some games that would just be a matter of HP loss, in some games that would be just like writing a quick condition for it. Here, there was a lot of work. No, none of these cards are going to work. I'm going to have to draft something. Actually, I'm going to have to draft 2 of these cards for that. One of them will definitely not see use in play. And I mean, that was a further frustration that for all this time organizing cards, often the characters would just roll well enough that they never saw actual use. Ultimately, the cards just involved more planning and work than I want when I'm running a game. In our last session, Matthew, one of the players, gave the feedback that he had seen that at times the cognitive load of this game was probably more than I liked. And I really appreciated that as possibly the kindest and gentlest way that he could have said that the game was just overwhelming me at times, which it genuinely was. So my takeaways from the game. This is my first time running a Gumshoe game or playing. I hadn't played any before. I would say that I'm maybe not totally sold on the system, but I did enjoy it and I will be running more. I've got a Trail of Cthulhu game now on the calendar coming up, and I think I'm going to try and convince my home group to try out Time Watch when we finish the game we're running at the moment.
Awesome. Yeah, Gumshoe is... I have a love uncertainty with Gumshoe.
Not love-hate, just the love uncertainty.
It's not that I hate it, because there's some things I really, really love about it and approaches to it, and I keep trying to tweak it to make it fit.
Yeah, mad props to you, Shane. I have not mustered in the courage to run a Gumshoe game yet, so nice.
Listeners, we want to let you know that Hearts of Wulin, our PBTA game of wuxia melodrama, is now available as a PDF on DriveThruRPG. Hearts of Wulin emulates films like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon and Shadow, and TV series like The Untamed and Ancient Detective. It is inspired by the Chinese martial arts novels of Jin Yong and Gu Long and their many adaptations. In these tales, romance is as dangerous as a blade. You can buy Hearts of Wulin at the Gauntlet store on DriveThruRPG. You can find more information and resources for it on our Gauntlet blog, on the Gauntlet webpage at gauntlet-rpg.com.
In our second segment, Agatha is going to talk about a topic of her choice. What did you want to talk about today?
Great question. As a 2 times Emmy Award winner, I would love to come in to talk about my podcast.
Yeah, 100%.
Listeners cannot see me, but I do want to talk about it because actually it was so funny when we won. We were actually a bunch of us. I think it was Daniel, Steve, and I. We were all in a meeting where we were just like talking about like an upcoming episode, and then we were like really digging into the logistics of it when Daniel was on his phone, and then he looked up and said, "Oh, we won." We won the Ennies. And I was like, "What?" And then we paused the meeting and, went on Twitter where all credible news can be found to confirm our win, and that was really cool. I kind of wanted to do like a retrospective, which I guess we should do on Asians Represent and stuff here. But this is my platform right now. It's my time. So I will talk about what I want, which is I think that I am really happy about. First of all, about winning. I'm very excited to win in general. It's nice to like have your efforts be recognized, I guess. But more than that, I think one thing that I felt when people ask me like, "Oh, like how's it feel to, like win this award?" How I always felt was that it's not my award, because Asians Represent is really, when we started it, we wanted it to be like a platform for like getting Asian voices and like having a way for Asian creators to like speak in the specific space where other people can find them and listen to them too, and where they can feel like they are speaking not just to the void, but to a community of other Asian people and allies. And so I feel like every single time that we have won, which so far is just twice, but it's been very encouraging to me about the direction that the TTRPG space is taking. Especially being on Twitter and things like that, like you always see, Twitter is just the land of hot takes. And so like people would be calling out things that they see are wrong. And a lot of that is actually, it's good, that people have the space to be able to speak up and to like point things out. But at the same time, like I think sometimes that kind of overshadows the positivity that is happening and like the really big strides that this space has been taking. One of the reasons why I think that we have been recognized is because we are like the first podcast to really like be like, we're a podcast about diversity. Actually, that's not true. No, there's Game Closet, which I think came out at around the same time. So I'm not actually sure. So don't quote me on this. There's more and more podcasts that are from marginalized voices. This, I think, is the first one about a specific group of people of color. I'm pretty sure about this. And so it's kind of, in a way, it's inevitable, in my opinion, where it's like, if you want to, show that we are taking steps as an industry to be more inclusive and to really like raise each other up, then you should probably nominate a podcast called Asians Represent. But on the other hand, like, it did happen, right? Like, people were like, yeah, this is something that's important to us, that we want to make a point, and that we think that all of these different people whose voices have been featured on this podcast, like, that is a positive contribution to the gaming sphere. And so I think that's really cool. I'm just really thankful for all of the people that voted. Thank you. And also, I'm very excited about being better known because of winning awards, because that means that we will have a better platform to also feature different people, because I think that's the biggest thing that I care about, that Daniel and I care about Asians Represent, which is that we want to keep interviewing people and we want to keep doing actual plays with different cast, and we want to talk about all these different artists. But sometimes, like, you have to like get to a certain level before what you're doing makes like a really big impact. Like, no matter what, you will make an impact, but people have to know about you for what you're doing and the people that you are featuring to be heard. And so I think this is really cool that it's happening. So those are my thoughts. I do think that we have a lot of space for improvement in terms of like even like diversifying our own cast, because we've been largely East Asian. And so the podcast is not called East Asians Represent, it's called Asians Represent. So we need to up our game. So if you are a South Asian or a West Asian listener and you have like cool things that you want to talk about or like games that you want to feature, hit me up or hit Daniel up. Hit one of us up on Asians Represent or on Twitter.
Let's say that someone hasn't followed Asian Represent right now. They've heard about it through the second award. Where would you tell them to start? What would be the series or set of episodes or things that you go, you want to get into this, here's where you start?
Great question. The best way to find out our new content is actually on YouTube, because we usually are now streaming through Twitch. This happened because of the pandemic for various reasons. So most of our content is on Twitch and or YouTube. What I recommend is going on YouTube and then looking at our episode playlist and just picking one that you think is interesting. Because we talk about a lot of different things. Like, for example, representation in Magic the Gathering. We have like, I think, a 3-part series on Magic the Gathering. So if that's what you're interested in, or if you're more interested in like D&D, and like we talk a lot about D&D, which I think is also why we got bigger. Like, if you want, like, there's that. I do think that a really good primer is to go listen to our first podcast episode, which is on what is Orientalism. It's just like a good, like, if you don't know what that word means and you don't know like why it's important for Asians to talk about representation, or if you are like, what does it mean for me to be Asian, or like, do I count as Asian? We've actually had this come up a lot recently. And like, I think that's a really good place to look us up. But yeah, going through our episodes, I don't have specific episodes that I think are must listens, because they really do touch a lot of different topics nowadays. So whichever one you're interested in, check it out and then go from there. But also, you can feel free to message me or like tweet at me on Twitter at Mighty Shrimp with 2 Y's, or you can tweet at AZNS Represent. That's the Asians Represent Twitter. It's handled by Daniel. It's not by me. So if you want to talk to me specifically, get that Mighty Shrimp.
We'll get that in the show notes for you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I'm really excited.
Anything else you want to say about Asians Represent?
No, I think that I have I have said all that I wanted to say, which was just a giant plug.
I think you should. It's such a great show.
Thanks.
You were trying to find the word earlier, and I think what occurred to me is the term is trailblazer. Like, I think you really have.
Well, trailblazer.
I mean, I'm serious. That I think that opened up the space for a lot of people to talk about these things. But there were people that were howling into the void about these issues. They would tweet about them, singular things. You have drawn a critical mass so that these voices are being heard in a way that they weren't on G+, and they weren't on TTRPG Twitter 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah. And my dream is to see even more of these podcasts show up that are like also specifically highlighting different marginalized voices. And I would love to do like partner streams and stuff like that, I think, to uplift each other.
That's something you talked about, Shane, before, is finding a way to highlight more trans voices in games, right?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Game Closet, which I think does a great job of highlighting lots of different queer games and queer game designs. It is exciting that we're in a time where all of these sorts of voices are coming more to the fore in game design. And game criticism, I guess, game discussion.
All right, let's move on to our last segment.
All right. So for our last segment, we each discuss something that is lately inspiring us or giving us joy. So, Lol, what is giving you life this month?
So, I had one of my cats, the brother and sister. The brother passed away. I had only had him for 2 years. And just this last weekend, we adopted another cat. I had gone to our local pet refuge, which is a no-kill shelter. We had to get references and vet checks and all this. And so we got this cat, and we got him because it was like, they take you around and they tour you all these rooms with all these cats. And would you like this cat? And I see you want this kind of cat. So, and it was actually the first cat we looked at because he has a scar on his back. And we're like, that cat's kind of ugly. Nobody's going to adopt him, but he's really sweet. So we went for him. He is a cat from a house where the woman had 50 to 70 cats. And they ended up spreading the cats around to shelters in the area. And he is super long, super, super long. He's clearly pretty young, but it's very clear that he's never not been around other cats or not been around people, because he clearly gets very lonely if their people aren't around. He wants to be by you. His name is Tobias, after one of Sherry's characters from years ago, and he's a sweetheart. We're just on day 4 as of the recording of this, and Lucy, the sister cat, is still not sure what she thinks of this other cat in the way, but they're touching noses and stuff, so I know it's going to be fine in a couple weeks. So that's what's giving me life, is that cat.
Thanks, Lol. Agatha, what's giving you life?
I'm going to cheat and say 2, because my first one is that this segment gives me life. Because, I love listening to it whenever I'm listening to the Gauntlet podcast, and also I love that this is one of the things that you have to think about before coming on the show, because it starts making me think about all the things that I am enjoying in my life and that I'm thankful for. So this section is giving me life. On a less sappy note, I guess, what is giving me life is actually a phone game. And Sherry, shout out to you. No, it's not Nikki. I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
But it's a phone game called Animal Restaurant, which is another one of those incremental games where you have to watch a lot of ads to refresh your resources. But I don't know, it's like Neko Atsume. When Neko Atsume came out, quite a few years ago, I was obsessed with it because you just have this restaurant and gather cats. And this one, instead, you run a restaurant. Oh wait, Neko Atsume was you have a house and then you gather cats.
Right.
But this one is you run a restaurant and then you gather different animals. However, all of your employees are cats, and there's this really grumpy chef cat and then there's this, I don't know, this cleaner, handy person cat who always looks really tired. There's not a lot of content in it, but I play it every single day, and it's just such a great de-stressor from work And also everyone pays in cod, and they just like throw cod onto the ground when they're done eating, and then you have to click it to get. I'm just like, yes, I'm here for this. I'm here for this. And you have a magic fountain that you can make a wish onto, and sometimes it gives you more cod. It's also very cute. I think that's the biggest draw. It's mechanically very uninteresting, but it's giving me life.
Awesome.
That's amazing. So what is giving me life is something that is not going to mean anything to about 99% of our listeners. I think Blake Ryan, as far as I know, the only other Australian regularly playing on the Gauntlet, is the only person who's even going to know what I'm talking about. But Melbourne Football Club, just a couple of weeks ago, won their first grand final since the 1960s. As a lifelong Melbourne Football Club fan, I cannot express to you how exciting this was. I have spent literal years of my life sitting in the rain in the fan club section of the MCG. And it was a great game, so it was very exciting. My partner is American and basically has no understanding of what Australian rules football is. If people don't know, that is like, it's a separate code. It's not soccer or rugby or anything like that.
Oh.
Yeah. It's a great game. It is quite confusing for people who haven't seen it before, but, check it out. After the game, I was trying to sing the club theme song while I cried tears of joy, and the look on my partner's face just seeing me try to do this was really something to behold. And I have just been walking on air ever since, just so happy that we finally got a grand final. So that is what has given me life in the last month. And that's our show. You can find out more about the Gauntlet at www.gauntlet-rpg.com, where you can find articles, podcast info, and links to our forums. You can follow us on Twitter at GauntletRPG. If you're interested in playing with the Gauntlet, do check out our forums or check out our Patreon at patreon.com/gauntlet. Remember, the hard part is spelling Gauntlet right. Agatha, thanks so much for joining us this month.
Thank you for having me.
Right, and thank you too, Lol.
Thank you so much for doing the hard lifting today.
Oh, I don't know about that, but all right. Thanks so much, everyone. That's our show.